Internal documents now prove, in writing, that the suffering endured by American families, federal workers, and veterans during the last major government shutdown was not an unfortunate consequence of political gridlock.
No.
It was a calculated, operational necessity. The severe financial and emotional pain experienced by millions was openly and explicitly referred to as leverage by top party operatives.
And not just once, not as a slip of the tongue.
No, in sustained, time-stamped internal communications. This isn't partisan speculation.
Yeah.
This is verifiable documentation of intent.
What this leak really exposes is a shift from politics as governance to politics as crisis management.
Where the crisis itself is the asset.
Exactly. The crisis becomes the most valuable thing they have. The tragedy, from an analytical perspective, is the clear documentation that those struggling, they weren't viewed as citizens in need of protection.
No.
They were seen as instrumental pressure points, just, pieces on a board to be manipulated for immediate political and, crucially, financial gain.
The question we face now is profound. How did high-ranking political staff decide that maximizing American hardship was a dial they could actively turn up, not just for power, but for profit?
It's a fundamental breakdown.
We're going to uncover the full story and the specific tactics they employed to engineer panic. Stay with us as we break this down in our in-depth discussion right here on News Focus Podcast. And if you find our reporting valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to support our channel. We truly appreciate it. Okay, let's unpack this. The first thing we have to establish for you, the listener, is the quality of this evidence.
Right.
Because when we talk about a political leak, it often involves, speculation or hearsay. Someone heard someone say something. This is different.
Completely different.
We are talking about precise, time-stamped, and verifiable internal emails and memos. The kind of documentation that is usually locked away with the expectation of permanent secrecy.
The kind of thing you never expect to see the light of day.
Exactly. And insider whispers suggest someone inside the political operation just finally snapped.
Right.
That they couldn't take the moral weight of this strategy and decided to release the entire documented trail.
And that level of evidentiary rigor, that's precisely why this has escalated so quickly. It's gone from a political controversy to a systemic crisis of trust almost overnight.
Because it's not he said, she said?
No. For years, the strategic value of the shutdown was debated. Opponents of the Democratic strategy argued that the prolonged suffering was intentional, but those claims were always dismissed. They were called, right-wing paranoia or just a partisan attack.
Standard political mudslinging.
Right. But what the leak provides is confirmation, in their own words, through their own planning documents. It confirms that these critics were, they were observing reality.
They saw what was happening.
They did. The documents don't just confirm the existence of chaos. They confirm the cold analytical intent behind the chaos. And that's why the political impact has been so immediate and, frankly, potentially devastating to the party's core identity.
And that confirmed intent, it reveals the core shock of this entire story. The suffering, the missed paychecks, the delays in SNAP food assistance, the veterans left in limbo.
All of it.
It wasn't just collateral damage, which is a term they actually used.
Which is horrifying enough.
It is, but it was crucially referred to in one memo as the plan. The suffering was the strategy.
It creates it's a transactional view of the American public. The source material shows staffers openly discussing how increased pressure on families, on federal workers, on small businesses, it didn't just passively exist.
Right.
It actively strengthened negotiating leverage. So this isn't just about passively observing the pressure that's built.
No, it's about quantifying it.
It's quantifying it and identifying it as the primary political asset in the negotiation. You have to imagine the millions of Americans who felt completely abandoned during that shutdown.
Of course.
These documents confirm that feeling wasn't imagined. It was systemic. They weren't being protected by the party they trusted. They were being strategically weaponized against the opposition.
Weaponized, that's the word.
Analysts who study political psychology, they describe this as the most ruthless aspect of the entire strategy, the complete instrumentalization of their own constituent base.
This brings us back to a moment that was highly criticized at the time. Catherine Clark's public comment that families were being leveraged.
Yes, I remember that clearly.
At the time, her allies, they rushed to her defense. They claimed she misspoke, or that the quote was taken entirely out of context just to score political points.
And that defense, based on the documented evidence we now have, it collapses. It collapses entirely. The leaks prove the exact opposite of what the defense claimed. Her public statement wasn't a political blunder, it was a moment of accidental transparency.
A slip.
A slip, exactly. It provided a public window into the core, calculated strategy that Democrats were already discussing extensively behind closed doors. It was the tip of an iceberg that we now see is vast and fully structured.
So we have to remember there were two distinct narratives operating at the same time during that shutdown.
Absolutely. Two parallel realities.
Help us delineate that distinction because it really defines the documented breach of public trust here.
Certainly. So, on one hand, you had the public narrative. This was the message that was carefully crafted for the media, for public consumption. It was centered on compassion, on empathy, on standing with working families.
The "we're fighting for you" message.
Precisely. Fighting fiercely to protect the vulnerable from what they called Republican cruelty. That was the public-facing story.
Okay. And the private one?
The private strategy, which is revealed in these internal communications, was purely focused on maximizing leverage. It was all business. It detailed precisely how to extract political advantage directly from the public's pain.
Not how to solve it.
No, not at all. The goal was to sustain the crisis long enough to make the political cost to the opposition unbearable.
And the internal messaging threads among staffers, they echoed this shockingly cynical philosophy.
It did.
The source material reveals repeated discussions where the focus was on how the longer the pressure lasted, the better the optics became.
Better for them.
For them, yes. And crucially, the more disruption families felt, the easier it became to effectively place the blame solely on Republican holdouts.
It was a conscious decision to maximize political benefit rather than an immediate effort to minimize harm. When analysts examine this kind of ethical breakdown, they look for evidence of intent.
And here it is.
It's all here. When internal communications celebrate increased family disruption, missed mortgage payments, canceled travel, delayed medical appointments, when they celebrate that as a positive development for their strategic goals, a serious moral and ethical line has been crossed.
It's not a reactive strategy.
No, this was a sustained, coordinated plan. It was crafted well in advance, specifically designed to convert the anxiety and the genuine hardship caused by the shutdown into political capital and negotiating power. The public saw a party dedicated to empathy.
But the internal operatives, according to these documents, just saw leveraged data points. The conclusion of this first part is clear. The suffering was not accidental, and the messaging was a cover for a documented strategy of exploitation. Okay, let's move now from the established intent to these specific, cold-blooded tactics revealed in these communications. Because this isn't just a passive acceptance of suffering. The documents show clear evidence of the active engineering of panic.
Right. This is the next level.
The leaks demonstrate that staffers weren't primarily discussing how to resolve the shutdown. They were focused, in chilling detail, on how to maximize its emotional and financial impact on specific demographics.
The documents detailing the psychological manipulation they're perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this entire release.
It feels that way.
For instance, one thread shows aides specifically discussing the optimal time to release public statements. Now, you would think that would be based on policy milestones or negotiations. But they were timing these political attacks not based on policy, but to coincide precisely with peak frustration. That's the term they used.
Peak frustration? How were they even measuring that?
Through proprietary polling and social media metrics, they were tracking it in real time. This suggests a constant, almost clinical monitoring of the public mood.
But not to offer relief.
Not at all. The specific goal was to deliver political messaging at the moment the pain was most acute. That way, they ensure maximum emotional resonance and, critically, they maximize the blame aimed at their opponents.
So they weren't just passively observing the public's breaking point.
They were actively leveraging it, waiting for it.
And they were highly specific about the nature of the financial pain they wanted to maximize.
Yes, very specific.
The sources show aides discussing how the failure to deliver federal paychecks specifically increased pressure on key GOP holdouts.
You were mapping it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They analyzed which swing district representatives would face the greatest local backlash because their constituents were missing their income. But the most shocking revelation, for me regarding tactics, was the suggestion to actively delay procedural votes.
That's the one.
Delaying votes if the internal assessment indicated that public frustration levels were not yet high enough to force the opposition's hand.
And we really need to analyze that specific suggestion, delaying procedural votes, because that moves the strategy from, passive neglect to active obstruction and manipulation.
It's a different category of action.
It is a procedural vote in Congress, like one on a continuing resolution, which is the funding mechanism often used to end a shutdown. That's usually a straightforward mechanism.
A way out.
A way out, exactly. Delaying it is a deliberate act of political obstruction. And the documents confirm this obstruction wasn't because of a failure in policy or negotiation. It was because their internal metrics indicated that the human cost, the level of public suffering, had not yet reached the optimal point to satisfy their political needs.
The optimal point.
It treats hardship not as a crisis, but as an adjustable tool, a lever they could control. They were actively delaying the resolution of a national crisis to achieve what they termed optimal leverage outcomes.
So this confirms definitively that the shutdown was intentionally prolonged.
Without a doubt.
And this operational philosophy confirms what analysts have now termed the leverage dial metaphor.
Yes, and it's a chillingly accurate term because a dial implies active control.
It's not just something happening to them.
Exactly. It's not a side effect they're trying to manage. It's a tool, a dial they can turn up or, I suppose, turn down.
But the documents suggest they were only ever interested in turning it up.
Precisely, to get the outcome they wanted. And this is the critical distinction you have to make. In a crisis, political leaders are morally and functionally obligated to alleviate suffering as quickly as possible.
That's the job.
That is the job. The evidence here shows that this group of leaders made the opposite documented calculation, that continued suffering was, in fact, necessary to meet their stated strategic outcomes.
They were engineering panic, not managing a crisis.
They were. They understood that emotional volatility and unpredictability function as a potent political accelerant. The private messaging was unambiguous. Hardship was not a tragic consequence, it was the entire operational messaging strategy. It was designed to wear down the opposition using the financial and emotional stability of average Americans as the principal tool.
And if we were looking for one single document that confirmed this ruthless intent, a specific smoking gun, it arrived in the form of a memo circulated among senior aides.
The necessary component memo.
That's it. This document is analytically central because it outlines, in stark business language, exactly how visible disruption and public suffering directly increase donor engagement metrics.
And this is where the language they use becomes so critically important. The memo explicitly describes hardship not as a problem to be solved, but as a necessary component of the broader messaging and financial cycle.
A necessary component.
Think about what that means. According to their own planning, the suffering wasn't an unfortunate outcome. It was a prerequisite for the strategy to even function. It confirms that the suffering was intended and integrated into the very structure of their political and financial plan from the very start.
So let's delve into the mechanics of why they deemed it necessary.
Yeah.
What data supported this conclusion in the memo?
The memo acts almost like a market analysis of American pain. It's clinical. It details exactly how this manufactured cruelty functions as a political and financial currency. It breaks down several key findings.
Okay.
First, that emotional volatility, particularly fear and outrage, boosts click rates on their digital communication platforms. Simple as that.
More clicks, more engagement.
Exactly. Second, that unpredictability and the sense of impending financial doom drives a sharp spike in what they call small dollar immediacy.
What does that mean?
Donations given immediately following a catastrophic news announcement. The panic drives the donation. And third, that crisis language successfully creates and reinforces partisan loyalty. It frames the donation as an urgent defense mechanism against the other side. The analysis suggested that in the absence of acute suffering, the donation engine stalls.
So maintaining the tension.
Maintaining the tension, maintaining the hardship was financially indispensable.
So they calculated the precise market value of human fear and financial uncertainty. They effectively linked anxiety directly to donation volume.
Indeed. It's a fundamental perversion of the stated purpose of governance. The memo's conclusion is perhaps the most salient warning for future political behavior. It states, maintaining public tension is essential to achieving strategic outcomes.
And that doesn't just apply to this one shutdown.
No, it outlines a blueprint for perpetual crisis management. It's a business model founded upon monetized emotional distress. When you analyze a disruptive political event and find it was described internally as a necessary operational requirement, you understand the profound level of cynicism involved.
It's a calculus.
It is. The strategy was built on the calculus that the political and financial gains derived from public suffering outweighed the ethical cost of inflicting and sustaining it.
This sophisticated analysis of human anxiety as a financial accelerant leads us directly into our next section, the fundraising machine. We've established the intent was to inflict pain for leverage.
Documented intent.
Right. Now we have to detail how that suffering was converted directly into campaign cash, how they monetized crisis and fear on an industrial scale.
To fully understand why they pursued such a high-stakes, ruthless strategy, we have to acknowledge the dire financial backdrop. You can't separate the two.
Oh, yeah.
The source material emphasizes that the Democratic committees were facing an existential financial crisis in early 2025. This was due in large part to the financial wreckage left in the wake of Kamala Harris's 2024 presidential campaign.
Which analysts describe
As the most expensive failed presidential bid in modern history, the financial fallout was immense.
So the catastrophic failure of that campaign had cascading financial consequences for the party infrastructure itself.
Absolutely. The Democrat committees were, according to the sources, practically hollowed out. They were facing significant debt, and their cash reserves were critically low, approaching historic lows.
And the donor base.
Fatigued, disillusioned following the election results. With a Republican administration now in power, the party urgently needed an immediate, powerful, and unifying spark, something to reignite its small-dollar donor base and rebuild momentum on platforms like ActBlue before the crucial 2026 midterms.
For our listeners who may not be familiar with the specifics of political tech, can you explain what ActBlue is and why its momentum is so critical to the party structure?
Of course, ActBlue is the key Democratic small-dollar fundraising platform. It's a nonprofit technology organization that basically processes donations for thousands of Democratic campaigns and progressive groups.
So it's the financial pipeline.
It's essentially the financial bloodstream for the modern party. And its momentum is critical because small, recurring online donations. That's the engine that provides flexible, unrestricted cash flow. It allows committees to pay staff, run rapid response operations, and build field infrastructure. When ActBlue momentum stalls, the party's operating capabilities seize up.
So the shutdown, strategically, was seen as the perfect stress event to jumpstart that critical engine.
Exactly. The shutdown, therefore, became viewed not as a policy crisis that needed immediate resolution, but as an opportunity to repair their damaged balance sheet.
That's unbelievable.
Initial strategy notes literally describe the shutdown as the perfect opportunity to reactivate small-dollar donors and a chance to rebuild ActBlue momentum.
The coldness of that analysis.
It was viewed as a controllable stress test for their emotional messaging. This confirms that for the political operators involved, the primary goal shifted from finding immediate legislative solutions to maximizing leverage and, most importantly, maximizing cash flow. The crisis was, in their internal view, a financial engine just waiting to be properly fueled.
And the leaks reveal highly sophisticated coordination between the crisis messaging and the ActBlue fundraising efforts. This wasn't just haphazard or opportunistic.
Well, not.
It was a well-oiled sales strategy, meticulously disguised as a moral crusade to protect the vulnerable.
It was a deeply targeted and data-driven operation. Yeah. The documents show staffers actively mapping out which donor demographics, which age groups, which geographic regions, which previous donor categories would respond most strongly to specific fear-based subject lines in their email blasts.
They were A/B testing fear.
Essentially, yes. They were tracking, with clinical precision, which donor lists performed best on the exact days when federal agencies announced service delays. For example, they monitored spikes in giving correlated precisely with announcements of delayed tax refunds or reduced SNAP benefits.
Linking human anxiety directly and instantaneously to giving metrics.
That's it. There are documented, explicit references to maximizing small-dollar engagement during the period they internally labeled the shutdown peak frustration. This is policy crisis management turned into pure, cynical salesmanship.
Pain, panic, political donations. That was the formula they explicitly developed. And nothing encapsulates the operational reality of this formula better than the specific internal quote that surfaced.
The smoking gun quote.
Right. It came straight from a staffer's message thread. It reads, "The shutdown is generating strong donor energy. Keep messaging aligned."
That statement, placed against the documented backdrop of widespread suffering veterans unable to access benefits, federal workers facing eviction, it leads to an inescapable analytical conclusion.
That conclusion is that the shutdown was never about protecting families from day one. It was about mining them, as the sources imply, for political donations.
Exactly. The fear generated by the crisis was simply the most effective marketing tool they possessed at a moment of severe financial depletion. They used the uncertainty of the shutdown to create an emotional vacuum that only a donation, framed as an urgent political necessity, could apparently fill.
It's a vicious cycle.
It is. They were effectively promising that the money would fund the fight against the Republicans who were supposedly causing the pain, all while actively delaying the end of the crisis internally to keep that profitable donation window open.
This illustrates an extreme moral hazard.
It's a classic case. The perceived short-term financial benefit to the political party absolutely trumped the immediate well-being of the constituents they claim to represent.
It creates a political environment where chaos is intentionally profitable, and stability is viewed as a financial threat to the party structure.
And that fundamentally warps the motivations of those in power. It replaces public service with perpetual crisis management designed for revenue generation.
Which raises a critical question. If this highly sophisticated, engineered messaging was designed to extract maximum cash, who exactly was on the receiving end? The crisis was national, but the financial engine was clearly focused elsewhere. That takes us into our next section, the coastal pipeline and the OAF case study. And this details the profound geographic and financial targeting revealed in the documents.
Right.
The sources show that the entire shutdown messaging was not being shaped by the lived experiences of struggling families in the most affected swing states, places like Georgia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, or Michigan.
The people actually feeling the pain.
Exactly. The narrative was being shaped and optimized exclusively by and for what the source material repeatedly refers to as coastal elites thousands of miles away.
This documents a vast, inherent disconnect between those suffering the consequences and those strategically profiting from the crisis. The people crafting the messaging and the donors responding most strongly to the crisis appeals were geographically and financially insulated from the severe impact of a missed federal paycheck.
Completely insulated.
The internal emails contain detailed donor segmentation charts, and they explicitly list high-value coastal activists as the primary target for shutdown messaging. These are individuals, typically in high cost of living areas, financially secure, for whom a small dollar donation functions more as a form of political engagement or an expression of outrage.
Not a financial sacrifice driven by existential stress.
Not at all. It's a different world.
So staffers weren't polling constituents in Atlanta. They were strategizing around which slogans played best in affluent neighborhoods in San Francisco.
Right.
Which emotional angles resonated most effectively in Manhattan's high-income zip codes, and which specific crisis language drove the strongest act, blue spikes and liberal enclaves in Los Angeles.
The entire national narrative of suffering was being tailored, not around the need for relief, but around the desire of a specific donor base to feel politically engaged.
And this highlights a crucial flaw in modern political strategy, the outsourcing of political priorities to the donor class.
It's a huge problem. The actual suffering on the ground in a battleground state like Ohio, where a federal worker might be facing genuine eviction, that became secondary. It became less important than the narrative designed to keep wealthy political activists on the coasts clicking "donate now."
The priorities were inverted.
Completely. The documents reveal a hierarchy where the optics of suffering were valued higher than the cessation of suffering itself. The local crisis was simply a tool for distant financial gain.
The prime documented example of this glaring discrepancy is the case of Senator John Ossoff,
Yes.
who had built his public identity and political brand as the great protector of Georgia families, the principled moderate, fighting tirelessly against political gamesmanship.
A carefully curated public image. But the leaked documents expose a profound contrast between that image and the private operational directives issued by his campaign team during the crisis.
What do they show?
The sources confirm that Off's team was aggressively targeting high-volume donors outside of Georgia. They were primarily focusing on deep blue states like California and New York. The local image of fighting for Georgians just fine. It dissolves entirely under the scrutiny of these detailed memos.
All the focus was on out-of-state receipts.
All of it. We see one memo that specifically outlines a comprehensive fundraising rollout designed explicitly around what they called shutdown narrative escalation.
They weren't just reacting to the crisis.
No, they were using his local position to actively ramp up the crisis narrative for financial gain in distant markets.
The proof of intent is right there in the internal naming conventions.
It is. The email specifically highlighted a list named Coastal Activist Priority Donors.
And who are they?
These are people who, according to the team's internal analysis, respond strongest to emotional, crisis-based appeals because they view politics as a high-stakes, distant conflict.
So this confirms that while Senator Oaf was publicly working to end the crisis for his constituents,
His fundraising apparatus was strategically engineered to keep the crisis alive, to maximize the out-of-state donor pipeline that viewed the shutdown as essential political theater.
it's a sophisticated, calculated strategy.
One that knowingly prioritized long-distance financial support over the immediate local relief of his own constituents.
The documented conclusion for his mandate is devastating. While families in Georgia were facing increasing financial stress, Senator Oaf's political operation was building an out-of-state donor pipeline that functionally required the crisis to continue for maximum financial yield.
It confirms everything we've been saying. The pain was leverage, and the leveraging was engineered by the very people who claimed to be fighting to protect the exploited.
And the moral hazard here is just, it's compounded by the geographic distance.
Geometrically compounded. Those who were funding the strategy were furthest removed from its tangible consequences, which allowed for a dangerous level of emotional and ethical detachment.
The whole strategy highlights how the marriage of hyperpartisanship and advanced digital donor technology can effectively incentivize the deliberate proliferation of chaos.
Because chaos, as they documented themselves, is highly profitable.
We now turn to our final section, the political collapse and accountability. The timing of this leak, here in November 2025, under a Trump administration that campaigned heavily on draining the swamp. It transforms this from a scandal into a political earthquake.
The highest magnitude, yes. And Republicans, naturally, seized upon the irrefutable, time-stamped documentation of this cynical strategy.
Their response was swift and unified.
And laser-focused, because the leaks provided them with undeniable proof of ethical misconduct and intentional manipulation. This moved it beyond a simple policy disagreement.
Steve Scalise immediately called it strategic suffering.
A direct reference to the planning in the internal memos. Ted Cruz described the emails as proof of calculated cruelty. The key, analytically, is that they had the documents to back up these claims.
And Speaker Mike Johnson, in a key press conference, he critically emphasized that this was not a case of mismanagement or incompetence.
Or even standard political horse trading.
Right, but rather one of deliberate exploitation of the American public. The unified message was clear. Democrats didn't just lose control of the shutdown, they actively used it, inflicted pain, meticulously monitored the fallout, and systematically monetized the resulting chaos.
For years, a significant element of the Democrat Party's political identity hinged on claiming the moral high ground. They positioned themselves as the party of compassion, the protectors of the vulnerable.
The guardians of working families.
Exactly. These leaked communications have fundamentally destroyed that entire narrative. The contrast between their highly empathetic public rhetoric standing with families fighting for the impacted and the private indifference.
Where Americans were just viewed as numerical leverage data points.
It's too stark, too documented, and too devastating to ignore. The veneer of compassion has shattered, replaced by the image of calculated political scientists optimizing human pain.
And the emotional weight of this leak for the average American is that realization that those warm, empathetic speeches delivered on television were, according to the documents, nothing more than a carefully constructed facade.
Just a show.
And behind the curtain was a political machine that calculated human suffering like a metric, discussed pain as useful, defined disruption as expected, and framed public frustration as politically advantageous.
And here we find the bitter irony inherent in the whole strategy. The calculated plan failed politically.
It failed.
Despite the immense suffering they successfully leveraged and the brief financial engine they managed to spark, analysts note that the Democrats secured virtually no significant legislative or policy wins in the end.
So they inflicted catastrophic political damage on themselves for almost no policy return.
None. They failed to gain lasting public sympathy, and now that the leak has surfaced, the political narrative has flipped against them with historic force.
They inflicted this prolonged, documented pain and ultimately gained nothing but significant debt and a massive, perhaps irreparable credibility gap.
A huge gap. Polls that have surfaced in the wake of this leak show a sharp swing in public sentiment, particularly among vital independent voters and even moderate Democrats.
What are they saying?
They report feeling fundamentally manipulated and misled. What began as a calculated, cynical attempt to generate political leverage for the 2026 midterms has instead become a political catastrophe that severely weakens their credibility.
And hands the opposing party A massive documented political victory.
It generates a trust deficit that is incredibly difficult to overcome. When voters fully understand and internalize that they were intentionally made to suffer for the sole purpose of political gain and financial extraction, they don't just shift their political allegiance.
No, it's deeper than that.
They lose faith in the integrity of the political process entirely. This wasn't politics as usual. It was a deliberate, documented violation of the public contract, and the consequences of that violation are now mounting rapidly.
The critical discussion now turns to formal accountability. And according to senior opposition figures, these leaks are merely the beginning.
The first step.
And the necessary steps for investigation are already being formalized.
That is correct. House committees are now reportedly preparing broad subpoenas, targeting the key individuals implicated in these message threads and memos.
What about ethics complaints?
They're being drafted and filed against principal figures cited in the source material, specifically naming operatives tied to Clark and Senator Oath. The pressure is immense.
And the current administration,
which came into office on a mandate to restore transparency and end Washington corruption, views these revelations as central to their platform.
So the question now isn't if accountability is coming for those who engineered this suffering. It's how deep the investigations will go. Especially when you hear that Democrat insiders are privately admitting that the fallout heading into the 2026 midterms will be brutal and prolonged.
Voters have long memories for when politicians deliberately weaponize their suffering. This documented scandal will follow these key figures and the party apparatus for years. It will serve as a constant, verifiable reminder of the documented choice to prioritize fundraising metrics over the immediate well-being of the American people. The transparency brought by this leak has ensured that the spotlight on the cynical, documented strategy of exploitation is not going anywhere. What these documents expose, fundamentally, is a deeply disturbing transactional view of the electorate. They reveal a political environment where, at the highest operational levels, citizens cease to be individuals with lives, families, and struggles, and instead become mere instruments, levers to be pulled, dials to be turned, and data points to be relentlessly exploited. Restoring trust in governance requires far more than just resolving the policy disagreements that initiate a shutdown. It demands a complete analytical reckoning with the documented intent to monetize and sustain human suffering for political and financial advantage.
That's all for this deep dive and analysis. But it leaves us with one haunting question. If the guardians of the rules are the first to break them, who is left to protect the game?